Hello, I'm Charles Barnett, and about a year ago, a little over a year ago, the Lord gave me an understanding or revelation for a topic that was brought to my attention concerning Deuteronomy 22:5, and this morning in prayer, the Lord reminded me of that. So I just wanted to share that with you, and concerning some issues with Deuteronomy 22:5, where it's considered a ceremonial law in the Old Hebrew, um, the Levitical law, and right now there's a lot of movement in Christendom or the Christian movement, predominantly in the apostolic movement, where people are totally throwing out Deuteronomy 22:5 when for many years people used to embrace it as a distinction of the sexes. And since it is the ceremonial law that under grace we no longer have to embrace or follow. I want to touch on that because in the fact that verses 1 through 6 is ceremonial law, verse 5, we cannot just toss it out. And I want to share with you what the Lord shared with me. But let me read it first. And Deuteronomy 22:5 says, "A woman shall not wear anything that pertains to a man, nor shall a man put on a woman's garment, for all who do so are an abomination to the Lord your God." Now, in all the other verses before that and after that, doesn't use the terminology abomination. This is one of the reasons why the Lord told me we cannot throw out Deuteronomy 22:5, which so many apostolic Pentecostal Christians are starting to do the last few years. And let me explain that to you. In this verse right here, the reason why it's an abomination is because an abomination, let's establish right now, first of all, what an abomination is. An abomination is something that God hates and is disgusting to him. And the reason why is because anytime there's something is an abomination to the Lord is because it's a direct violation to his moral law. It's morally detestable. And so that's why there's a lot of things in the ceremonial law of Moses that we don't have to embrace anymore. We don't have to practice anymore because it was just ceremonies for those for that day and time under the law of Moses, and is no longer needed under the dispensation of grace, which we're living in right now. But there are some things, like it says, grace brings us into submission to the law. And it's not talking about the ceremonial parts of the law of Moses, but the moral parts. Because there was a law before the law of Moses. And that was God's moral law, those things that he laid down with Adam and Eve in the garden, and they would teach them to their children. There is a moral law to God. Now, what the Lord showed me, and as I was looking at this, because when you break down the Hebrew terms, what pertaineth to a man, that women aren't supposed to wear pertaining to a man, that's talking about his warrior garments. In that time and era, was whatever the man would wear to go to battle. She was never to wear that. And a man was not supposed to wear what a woman wore. And that was a woman's garment, which is common to the housewife of that day. I looked that up, and it literally means like a dress that's fitted enough to tell she was a woman and not a man. And that, it signified she was married, she was a keeper of the house, she would bear children, and the man would go out and protect the family, work, and do battle. In that day and era, both sexes wore tunics or gowns. You're talking about in the Middle East, it's desert, lots of sandstorms, very hot, whatnot. And so both of them would wear tunics, men and women, gowns. They got to protect themselves from heat and other things. But in the Bible, breeches, if you look at breeches or pants, I've only been able to find them where it talks about the priest wearing breeches, and they had to be at least to his knees to cover his thighs. So it had to be at least to his knee. because in the Hebrew, the thigh is exactly the way it is in the English, covering the thigh and the knee. But women were never, it was never said that women wore breeches. And if you'll notice in the Middle East, especially those that embraced the dress code of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,000 years in the past, the men are wearing breeches under their tunics and the women don't. And you look at their culture, the way they cover their head and the way they cover themselves. I mean, a lot of the different religions in the Middle East, they'll do it slightly differently. But even the Hebrew women, they when they cover their head, they have it covered. A lot of them like to pull it back and leave their face exposed, whereas the Muslim women like to cover it all up. So there is slight differences, but they all still have a remnant or a direct correlation back to the custom of that day. Well, right now everybody's saying, well, see, since it's not talking about pants on a woman or, whatnot, and there's no direct correlation stating directly to women, not supposed to wear pants or wear pants, that people are saying, well, it's not saying anything about that, so it must be okay to do that. Well, I was looking at the information. It's good information. Anytime someone is bringing out the Bible and they're looking at what it means and the Hebrew and Greek and translations, and it's good. But that one word abomination there, as I was looking at the information, the Lord spoke to me and says, that one word right there changes that verse. He says, because it's an abomination, and see, I didn't know this before. This is revelation given to me. The Lord said, because it's an abomination, it is influenced by a moral law, though it's not written down. For what reason, we don't know. Maybe it was something that it wasn't really a big deal. In the Bible, we have a lot of things that are written because of issues that came up. So the apostles would write about it, the prophets would write about it. But sometimes there were certain things that weren't an issue, but people knew, almost like an unwritten law, because they knew the right from wrong. And if it wasn't an issue, then it never got addressed. This might be one of those things where it really wasn't an issue. And sometimes if you look at culture in the Middle East, it still really isn't an issue. You pretty much can distinguish a man from a woman when they're wearing tunics and breeches and whatnot. I can, even in the pictures, I can tell a woman from a man. And the ones that hold to the old traditions, you can tell a woman from a man. And the women are not wearing breeches. But the Lord told me that. He says, you cannot throw that out. And here's the reason why. This is a very powerful revelation. Is because there's nothing written. All you can look back is culture. Look at the Hebrew culture, the Hebrew history, and they'll back up that there is a distinction that women never wore breeches or any pants and should never wear pants because they were only designated for men. You can look at that. Yeah, it might not be written in the Bible, but it's influenced by God. And you even look at the hieroglyphics in the catacombs, on the walls of the catacombs of the first church under Rome, and you'll see women having their head covered in prayer, and they got a tunic going down past their knees, or a dress, or whatever you want to call it, and they're distinct from the men. And the men, you can see them praying. Some of them wearing a tunic. Maybe you can't see in the hieroglyphic that they're wearing breeches, but you can tell their head's not covered. There's a distinction. You can see it. Even in the early church, there was a distinction because they knew that there was a moral law that you didn't cross with God. And the Lord said to me this is, I think, the power of this revelation. He says, instead of throwing it out, we should embrace it even stronger, because Deuteronomy 22:5 is the only window into this unspoken, unwritten moral law of God that he laid down with Adam and Eve, and they passed it down throughout the generations of the distinction of the sexes, is that woman was supposed to be separate from man and man separate from woman, and men wore something that was pleasing to God that women were not supposed to wear because it was disgusting to God, and women wore something that was supposed to signify her grace and her beauty of being a woman that only she was to wear and that pleased God, and men were not supposed to wear it because it disgusted God. And so Deuteronomy 22:5 is the only window we have in the Bible that would show us that God does care about distinction of the sexes, and He does care about what you and I wear, and women never wore breeches, never wore pants, and the reason why, you can take it all the way back as far as you can, and it always goes back to the Garden of Eden. And yes, Adam and Eve, they probably just had tunics in the get-go when he first made them, but there's nothing written about when he decides to set their job description, their family description of a wife, where she tends to the house and she takes care of the children and things like that. And the man has to go out and till the ground and do whatnot, and what he has to wear to protect himself. And maybe this is where breeches came in, because he was going to make his living by the sweat of his brow. So Deuteronomy 22:5 is a very powerful verse in that it is the window into God's understanding, God's culture, and what God says about the distinction of sexes between man and woman, and that men don't wear dresses, more or less a fitted dress that would try to make you think you're a woman. God forbid. And I'm not saying the woman had to wear it skin tight so that you knew what she had. It was fitted enough to where you could tell it was a woman. And that's the way some of our women wear their dresses. You know it's a woman. And men were supposed to wear things that distinguished him being a man. And so I am going to take the stand where women don't wear breeches, women don't wear pants, and men wear the pants, and men don't wear dresses. And if a man wears a tunic or a gown, that he has his breeches on underneath, hopefully. If he doesn't, maybe it's too hot, that's fine, but at least he's a man, because I know they did that in the days of old. But a woman under her tunic or her gown, she shouldn't be wearing breeches. When you're out in the public eye, you should show that you are pleasing God and that you are distinguishing what God made you to be. Because if we don't do this, it is a direct violation of His moral law, and to God, He hates it. It's disgusting. He doesn't like it. If you really want to get God to be very upset with you, if you want the wrath of God upon your life, just break His moral law. I'm not telling you to do that. It's something, I'm just making a point. But if we want to please God, if we want the favor of God on our life, because everybody's talking about, oh, you got favor, you got favor. No, some of us don't have the favor of God because some of us aren't obedient to God. If we want real favor of God, we want God's blessings, we want God to put His hand upon us and sanction us and bless us and back us up, then we've got to obey His moral law. We've got to obey His foundational law of government, which is God, man, woman, children, the family unit, the marriage unit, the distinguishing between sexes, man and woman. There's a distinguishment, and it's from God. Anything outside of that is a violation of God, and it's an abomination. So I just wanted to share that with you. Deuteronomy 22:5, there's deep revelation in there. It's awesome. Let women be women and dress like a woman. Let man be a man and dress like a man. Man, you wear the pants, put on the pants and wear the pants. Ladies, you wear the dress, put on the dress and wear the dress. Be graceful in your dress. God blessed you to be a beautiful creature, not a rough-looking creature like men. Men are kind of rough-looking. We're rough and tough-looking. Most of us are supposed to be. Women are supposed to be graceful and beautiful, doubly refined. Let's not try to be what we're not, and let's embrace God. Let's embrace His Word. Let's look at the historical cultures and things that are influenced by God. Uh, just like um, Pharaoh was influenced by Joseph, so therefore that Pharaoh threw out all the gods of Egypt, and Jehovah, the God of the Old Testament, was their God until there rose a Pharaoh that knew not God, knew not Joseph, and he brought all that raw garbage back in. But if we can go back and look at those things in which influenced culture from God, we'll have a better understanding of why they didn't do things and why they did do things. And in Deuteronomy 22:5, please don't throw it out. Please don't disregard it. I'm watching good apostolics that you can't even tell that they're apostolic anymore. They don't look like the apostolic church in the book of Acts. They don't look like the hieroglyphics on the walls of the catacombs where the early church Christians suffered great persecution for the faith. And now these apostolics, they just look like the world. You can't tell a difference. There's no distinction. You know, they're starting to look like the harlot in the book of Revelation more than they're looking at like the bride of Christ. And I say this with all due respect and all love to my fellow brethren, but let's not go backwards. Let's go forwards. Let's not walk away from revelation, walk away from truth. But let's dig deeper and embrace God and His truth. And I know that was a revelation from God to me because I'm not smart enough to know all this stuff. So it was God. Open up the window of Deuteronomy 22:5 and take a look inside. Because if we can embrace God's moral law, He'll never be disgusted with us. So please, men wear pants, women wear dresses. That's the way God set it up to be. Let's keep it that way. And let's please God above all things. Above all pleasing our flesh and pleasing men or kingdoms of men. Let's just please God. God, there's only one of Him, and His name is Jesus. And so let's do that. Please, let's keep the distinction of the sexes intact. Let's show that we are true apostolics. We are the people of God, and let's be distinct from the world and from Satan's people and from people who hate God. Let's be distinctly different from them. And let's let God receive all the honor and the glory and the worship and praise. Just wanted to share that with you. God bless you. My name is Charles Burnett. You have a wonderful day and be blessed in Jesus' name.